And we're focusing on education tonight. Lots of plans about restarting education. Some universities starting online learning today, some holding back, trying to understand if students are ready or not. And then there's younger learners back to school as a whole new meaning with COVID-19. Government is considering how to restart schooling and protect students at the same time. And there's talk of a phased-in approach. This is a document by the Department of Basic Education. In a scenario, it discusses phasing in the return of pupils from the 6th of May all the way to the middle of July. Well, to discuss, we're now joined by former MEC and educational expert Mary Metcalfe via Skype. Ms. Metcalfe, thank you very much for joining us. Let's start with this phased approach. What do you think of the scenario planning that's been done thus far?
Well, I think that Dr. Ryan just said something that's very important and which we should take forward as our mantra as we look at the reopening of schools. He said we have to invest in alternatives to the lockdown. Now, investing in alternatives to the lockdown in education is making sure that our schools practice the necessary community health routines that will make it safe for learners to be at school without spreading the virus, make it safe for teachers. The concept of a phased reintroduction of learners to schooling makes a great deal of sense, and I do understand that the Minister has spoken about beginning with grade 12s and grade 7s, so high schools go back with one grade and primary schools go back with one grade, and then the subsequent grades incrementally as schools institutionalize these practices of preventing further infection. But the thing that I think all South Africans need to be very conscious of is that the document from the DB is very clear that these are tentative because nobody knows the progression of the virus. We know that when Professor Karim spoke to us a few weeks ago, he was saying that we're going to see a peaking in about September. If the peak is earlier, that may affect the plans. So schools, districts, provincial education departments need to be very nimble in terms of responding to the ongoing development of the virus. And as families, we've got to be ready to support our children, whatever steps are taken.
Does that mean a return to online learning, maybe going back to school and then going back home? And is that working as well? Because I wanted to ask you, I mean, even in these weeks that have gone by, has there been more inequality? We know some kids are happily learning online with Wi-Fi and laptops, but according to some estimates, about 60% don't have access to ICT, living in small shacks. Are we already seeing this divide widening?
Yeah, Dr. Tedros said something that I also thought was very important. This virus exploits the cracks between us. And the notion of learners keeping up with what teachers should be doing is the first thing that we need to understand should not be the goal. Secondly, the use of electronic platforms, personal devices, access to Wi-Fi is something that is a huge inequality in this country. I'm hoping that when the DBE and the provincial departments pull learners back to school, that we are able to give them guidance in terms of how to work productively at home in order to be engaged with learning opportunities with or without Wi-Fi, with or without devices. How can we support families to put into place routines that accommodate learning opportunities no matter what the social circumstances? Yeah. Now, one of the biggest challenges, as you've said, is crowded homes. But I believe that if parents and caregivers are able to take the care of their children into carefully planning the child's day, we won't lose all of the learning opportunities that must exist to keep children learning.
Yeah. If children go back, if this phased approach is implemented and things go as planned, you spoke about social distancing, and there are plans to separate the desks more, maybe 1.5 meters. That's going to be a challenge in overcrowded schools. But generally, I mean, is social distancing not a pipe dream when it comes to the younger kids?
Yeah, physical distancing in social solidarity is a huge challenge in our schools where there is overcrowding. I think that we need to work together as communities, pulling in our community structures, pulling in faith leaders to see how we can maximize space that might be available in the community. And we need to have very rigorous mechanisms of screening all children every day, possibly with just a temperature initial screening. We need to make sure that just soap and water, it doesn't have to be expensive hand sanitizer. Soap and water has got to be available, but the school management teams will have the responsibility of instituting these practices. So the physical distancing, the routines of care and cleaning, and making sure that our teachers are also safe.
Yeah. There are also plans to cancel some exams in July, maybe shorten holidays. Do you think that all of this can save the school year?
Well, part of the uncertainty is getting our heads around the fact that the school calendar as we know it is gone, and that there's going to have to be some very clever thinking within the DBE and the provincial departments in terms of how to structure the remaining time for periods of learning and breaks. And those may also need to be staggered, because if the grade 12s come back first and then the grade 9s come back much later, do they need the holiday at the same time? But all of those plans and the hard work that's going into them has to position us not to implement that timetable, but to be ready for other scenarios and other possibilities that will enable learners to take the books home, to be able to use the books to engage TV and radio programming. And things can change in a moment, depending on what the virus does and depending on what the infection does. Now, that's hard for families. It's hard for teachers. It's hard for planning. But we do need to know that we've got to be responsive to what happens with the virus so that we protect ourselves and we protect others.
All right, commenting on that plan to phase in the return of kids back to school, depending on their grade. That was education expert Mary Metcalfe.